Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at one of my mini Phalaenopsis orchid. This one is a no ID from my local grocery store, Trader Joe. I've had this one for I think 3 years, and this orchid has bloomed for me under my care twice, and this is its second time blooming under my care. And compared to its last blooming cycle, this year's bloom performance is much better. Let's go back in time. After last year's bloom cycle, it immediately put its energy toward root production and leaf production, and I just noticed that this orchid was almost on steroids because it was growing in a really fast speed. And one of the things that this orchid surprised me after it bloomed last year was it continued to grow so many aerial roots, to a point where I thought to myself, this orchid's roots were too long and I really needed to do something about it, maybe bend them down or somehow put them around the clay pot, but outside of the clay pot, but within the outer cup, just so that it's not taking too much horizontal space. But I decided to leave those roots alone because it's just one orchid and I think I can find room for it. So end of 2018, I noticed that it was putting out 2 spikes, but unfortunately only 1 spike continued to grow, and it took about a month and a half to really start blooming. So between a month and a half, in between that time, it was my winter time here, but I was really careful when it comes to humidity, temperature, and even just making sure that this orchid would receive enough sun exposure. And thankfully this orchid was not impacted in any way, because in late February, when I was gone for business trip, there was that one day that got really hot, and then the day before and the day after was pretty cold, so many of my orchids had somewhat of a bud blast, but this one did not have that. So I was really lucky and thankful that this one was not impacted. And during the time before orchids bloom, when they're in buds, there are a couple factors that you really want to make sure you try to keep constant, so that they won't blast on you. And number 1 is temperature, second one is humidity, and the third one is light exposure. And of course, the fourth one really is do not move it around too much. I sometimes, I see some people, they will move their orchids around to different rooms, different location in their house, because they want to enjoy the orchid in a different location. And that is not advisable, especially when orchids are in bud. And then the fourth one, or I guess the last reason or category of reason, would be overall orchid health. Sometimes when orchids are in buds, but if there is root rot, stem rot, any kind of rotting or pest infestation, that could potentially cause bud to blast as well. So these are some of the common factors, and I know it's really common. I still get them, right? Bud blast in Phalaenopsis, but there are things that you can do to minimize the likelihood. This orchid this year not only produced a lot more blooms. Last year I think it only gave me 3 blooms, also with a very long spike, but just 3 blooms. But this year I think the spike, it was about the same length, but this year it gave me 8 blooms, which I was really thrilled about. Another thing about this orchid is that even though it's not fragrant, but this year, even just with quarter strength fertilizer every week, and then at the end of the month I would use just water, pure water, to soak it the fertilizer, or I guess it still managed to get enough nutrients to be able to bloom like this, but then also grow lots of crazy area roots. In fact, I think I'm gonna give this orchid a nickname. I think I may even just call it Medusa. And then another thing I'm really happy about this orchid this year is that the way that the flower is blue, the flowers were, I guess, the display of it, because it's super neat, cascade looking, but then the way that the flowers look, they all face the same way. And what I did was, when the spike was forming, I made sure that I didn't move it around too much, and even if I have to move this orchid, I made sure that the orchid was put back to its original position, so that way the angle or the way that this orchid was getting sun facing exact the same window in the same location would be relatively similar, if not exactly the same, so that way the orchid spike would not be crooked and the flower can be, can open in the same direction. And this orchid achieved that this year, so I'm really happy about it. Another thing is, this orchid is still grown in bark chip. Sorry, it's 40% lava rock, actually 40% moss, and then 60% lava rock in a clay pot. And I haven't repotted this orchid. I think I should have done it last year, but because this orchid still is doing okay, I kind of want to see how long it will, that media will last until, this orchid is showing any kind of need to be repotted. I think I'm gonna give it another year just to see for myself. And because this orchid is a very common complex hybrid from grocery store, it's easily replaceable, so it's okay for me to be a little more brave and more bold doing experiments just for my learning, which I can also share with you. My Chinese subscribers always ask about how to obtain more aerial roots, and I usually tell them more from a philosophical standpoint, right? You grow orchids, you're not really, your goal is not to get aerial roots. Your goal is to get them to bloom so you can enjoy the blooms. And if they're not in bloom, then you look at the leaves. So in a way, you really need to make sure that your orchid is healthy with its root system and leaves. And the root system, I mean the roots inside the media. But some people, they ask that question as if the whole point of growing orchid is to have crazy aerial roots, and that's not the right I think focus. But because some of my orchids have really good aerial roots, and so I made a couple of videos and talked about how some of these orchids got their aerial roots, healthy aerial roots. One of the things is that a lot of the orchids that have good aerial roots are much closer to my humidifier. But then second thing that I have noticed recently is I think it may have to do with the water quality. Meaning, if the water is softer, it may actually produce better root growth, both inside the cup but then also outside. For example, I sometimes do miss the aerial roots with just reverse osmosis water, and that sometimes I think help the aerial roots grow better as well. So spray nicer quality, better quality of water, but then I do have humidifier on to help with humidity when it's needed. So I think those combination of reasons and tactics really help the production of aerial roots for some orchids. Sometimes I even see that water with lower ppm reading number, especially for Cattleyas, they grow better roots with soft water versus medium or hard water. So overall, I'm pretty pleased with this orchid's performance this year. I mean, the roots are really nice to look at, the leaves are cute, and the flower display this year was really a treat. So let's see if it'll continue to do well under my care for the next bloom cycle. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!